Here's why it's important to think of government and the concept of governance as a utility. When you look at this chart about how energy costs relative to household income has been declining as a percentage of income, you realize that is resonant with the first principles of technology and economics, because energy is one of the foundational concepts in the entire universe, and economic growth as measured by dollar output in relation to unit of energy consumed is one of the most durable and robust measurements of economic growth. Even better would be computational density or computational and storage progress per unit of energy consumed. But energy consumed is going down, as you can see in this chart. And this even understates the rate of improvement, because the chart begins in 1959, and the devices that the average American household had in 1959 would seem very, very primitive and frustrating to use by today's standards. The average household only had a small, primitive, not very good refrigerator, a stove, and a toaster, perhaps. Even TVs were not down to the median household in the United States, and if you think about countries other than the United States, they were further behind than that. Widespread usage of television outside of these 5 or 6 advanced economy countries did not happen until the 1980s and 90s in some cases. So government should be seen as a utility that keeps shrinking as a portion of the total economy for the same reason, because the functions of government should be limited to just 7 or 8 things that only the government can do. Government should only do things that need to be done by government. Anything the private sector could do should not be done by government, because the government will be far less productive and efficient in doing so. And this is only because the government does not face competition, whereas private sector companies face competition until they create an oligopoly for themselves, which I'll talk about in other videos. That is an abuse of the system that big corporations engage in when government is big enough to grant them monopoly power. That's another reason government should be small, because that prevents monopolies from emerging in the private sector anyway. So thinking of government as a utility, that sounds boring if your hobby is watching political news all day, but that's the wrong hobby to have in the first place. Politics should not be a mechanism through which people become rich or become famous. It should not be a substitute religion, which it is for a substantial percentage of the US population as well as the population in other Western democracies. And it should not be a reality TV that consumes 8 hours a day of your time. The founding fathers of the United States did not intend for the average person to have to spend 8 hours a day on political minutia and news about how a commentator on their side said one thing that was better than what the commentator on the opposing side said, and therefore we scored some point that was useful for only about a minute or so after that actual event, because tomorrow there'll be new news. That's why big government really draws productive life energy out of the economy in a way that many, many people in the United States are entirely unaware of. For all this talk about how the United States won the Cold War and how we're a free market system and the Soviet Union was not, there's a lot of older Americans, baby boomers, who still fail to see that the US has become a very big government, very socialist type of country, because our political system has 2 major parties, and neither major party is committed to making government small, productive, and efficient. One of those 2 parties pretends to stand for these things, but it does not really stand for these things, because it only stands for these principles up to a point where people from that party don't have to actually get into an argument with people from the opposing party, because the people from the party that pretend to support the free market system and small government always back down and surrender, and then expect to be praised for surrendering for some reason. So the United States has no party that is in fact committed to making government efficient. That is unfortunate, because when you have a government that is against first principles and is increasing as the size of the total economy, whereas the natural inclination of governance as a utility would be to decrease as a percentage of the economy. And that is why a lot of power seekers want to find their way into government to further their narcissistic or power-seeking goals. And this leads to the quality of politicians we get going down. You don't have conscientious people working for the greater good in politics anymore. You have people seeking fame and fortune for themselves with very questionable ethical limits, if any, in government. And that is the problem that we see. As recently as 2000, so not that long ago, the year 2000, the US federal government's budget was $1.85 trillion. Now, just 24 years later, 2024, The US federal government size is $6.5 trillion. $6.5 trillion. That is 3.5 times larger than it was in 2000. And that is a greater growth rate than the non-government part of the economy by a lot. So government is therefore consuming vital life energy, drawing it away from the private sector. Why? Because getting votes involves creating vote banks and bribing various demographic groups with free money just so that they vote for the party that is seen as giving it to them, even though both parties are not really opponents of each other. They are a uniparty that comprise pretend opposition, much like professional wrestling as an entertainment genre, is what we have. And bribing people with government money so that they vote a certain way is exactly when a system collapses. And many people are coming to a regrettable conclusion that democracy eventually becomes a failed system of government because there's a certain percentage of the electorate that can be bribed to vote a certain way, and there's another percentage of the electorate, often overlapping with the first percentage, that is just not intelligent enough to vote in any conscientious or long-term thinking manner. Just tax the rich or punish this group because of some alleged mistreatment of some other group from a long, long time ago, far before anyone today was even born. These types of memes have legs, and when there's enough money to be made in marketing such a message, you'll get people who are good at that but are not good people in their soul, do not have a good conscientiousness or value system, to focus their careers and their money-making activities in that direction. And that is when a system fails. Now, if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, and thank you very much for watching.